What would you do if you were chained to a frozen tree, left for dead, and the only hope came from 5 dogs no one sent, but who knew exactly where to find you? The snow was falling harder than it had all week. Thick, blinding sheets of white swallowed the Bitter Creek National Reserve, hiding every trail and turning trees into ghostly silhouettes. Most would call it suicide to be out here alone, but Jack Callahan wasn't most people. For over 20 years, Jack had patrolled these mountains as a forest ranger. He knew the land like the back of his hand, every ridge, every frozen creek, every howl that echoed through the pines. But today, he wasn't the one on patrol. He was the one hanging from a tree. His breath came out in ragged, frosty puffs. Chains bit into his wrists and chest, locking him against a thick pine, as if nature itself was trying to swallow him. Blood dried and fresh matted his temple. His uniform was torn, soaked in melted snow and something darker. He'd been here 2 days. 2 days since the ambush. He remembered the voices, angry, muffled behind ski masks. Men who wanted access to the reserve, to exploit the land for illegal hunting, logging, maybe worse. Jack refused, so they beat him, dragged him into the woods, and left him here, to die. The wind howled, lifting powdered snow from the ground like ghostly fingers. Jack couldn't feel his hands anymore, could barely feel his face. But he was still alive, and that fact alone made no sense. Until he heard it. A crunch, soft at first, like paws padding across snow. Then more 5 distinct sets. His eyes fluttered open, lashes crusted with ice. Shapes emerged from the blizzard low, dark and steady. At first, panic surged in his chest. Wolves. But no, these weren't predators. They were uniforms. Dogs? German shepherds, thick-coated. Snow-dusted eyes alert, canines. Jack blinked hard, unsure if he was hallucinating. The biggest one, his fur darker, a jagged scar crossing his left eye, stepped forward and locked eyes with him. It didn't growl, didn't bark. Instead, it sat. Tall, proud ears perked, chest out like a soldier. Another shepherd sniffed the air, while 2 others began circling. They weren't random. They moved like a team, like they had a mission. Jack's voice was barely a whisper. Good boys. The one with the scar moved closer, nose twitching near the base of the tree. Then it barked, just once, loud and sharp. The kind of bark meant to call attention. Not fear, not aggression, communication. The dogs sprung into action. One began digging around the chains buried beneath the snow. Another reared back and barked toward the open sky, alerting anyone nearby. The rest formed a perimeter. Jack tried to stay awake. Tried to believe what he was seeing. Then he heard it. Voices. Human ones. Urgent. Distant at first, then closer. I see him! Over here! Through his fading vision, Jack saw boots crunching through the snow, flashlights, parkers. A woman's voice, firm and steady. We've got him. Call it in. Get the sled ready. And the last thing Jack saw before blacking out was the scarred shepherd standing just a few feet away. Not barking. Not moving. Just watching him with something close to understanding. Jack woke to warmth. Too much warmth. His skin, frostbitten and raw, burned under the heat of clean sheets and fluorescent lights. Beeping filled the air. A heart monitor. IVs. The scent of antiseptic told him he wasn't dead. A nurse appeared beside him. You're safe now. Jack tried to speak, but all that came out was a rasp. The dogs. She smiled. They're outside. They haven't left. Especially the big one with the scar. He's been waiting for you. Jack exhaled shakily. It hadn't been a dream. Later that day, a tall, rugged man stepped into the infirmary. Sheriff Charles Whitmore, broad shoulders, jaw like granite. A face Jack had known for over a decade. "Jack," he said gruffly, pulling a chair closer. "You've got one hell of a story." Jack nodded weakly. "How did they find me?" Whitmore crossed his arms. "We had a winter training exercise. The K9 team got separated during a whiteout. Handler lost track of them." He paused. "They didn't come back to the checkpoint. They came straight to the station barking like crazy, covered in snow. Rachel, the handler, knew something was wrong. She trusted them, got on the ATV and followed. They led her straight to you." Jack's throat tightened. "They saved my life." Whitmore nodded. "They did. Especially that one with the scar. Name's Shadow. Been with the force a long time. Decorated war dog, lost his partner overseas. Hasn't bonded with anyone since." He stood and opened the door. A second later, Shadow stepped in, large, calm, his eyes still sharp. He walked straight to Jack's bed and gently rested his head on the mattress. Jack reached out, hand trembling. Shadow closed his eyes and leaned in, like he'd been waiting all his life to come home. Jack Callahan stared into the scarred eyes of the German shepherd at his bedside. And for the first time in days, maybe longer, he felt safe. Shadow didn't move. He didn't bark. He simply rested his head on the mattress, one paw lifted slightly like a silent vow. "I found you. I'm not leaving." Jack reached out again, fingers trembling from nerve damage and shock. When he touched the thick fur on Shadow's neck, the dog closed his eyes and leaned in. It wasn't obedience. It was something deeper. It was recognition. A few hours later, the door creaked open again. A woman stepped in, brushing snow off her jacket. She had snow-blonde hair, tied in a tight braid, sharp brown eyes, and the kind of quiet strength you didn't earn from books. "Rachel Vance," she said, stepping closer. "I'm the one who followed Shadow." Jack gave her a faint smile. "Then I owe you both my life." Rachel sat near the foot of the bed, her eyes resting on the dog. "Actually, it's him you owe. He refused to leave the station without someone following him, kept barking at the window, pacing in circles. The others followed, but it was Shadow who wouldn't give up." Jack turned to the dog, still lying beside him like a statue. "There's something different about him," Jack murmured. Rachel nodded slowly. "Yeah, there is." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Shadow's a military K9, 8 years old, served 3 tours overseas. His handler, Sergeant Dean Monroe, was killed in an ambush 2 years ago. Shadow stopped working after that, wouldn't listen, wouldn't bond. We tried reassigning him. Nothing stuck." Her voice cracked, just barely. "Until now." Jack looked at Shadow again. "You're telling me he chose me?" Rachel smiled softly. "Looks that way." Jack exhaled, unsure whether to laugh or cry. He had no memory of the dog's arriving. But now, as he lay in that hospital bed, battered and bandaged, he realized something no rescue chopper or deputy could have given him. Trust. Shadow hadn't just saved him, he had seen him. That night, Jack barely slept. Not because of the pain, but because of what kept crawling back into his mind. The chains, the tree, the voices. He hadn't imagined them. He remembered one voice in particular, gravelly, cold. "No one's going to find you out here, not in this snow." Jack clenched his fists under the sheets. Someone had tried to erase him, and they'd nearly succeeded. The next morning, Sheriff Charles Whitmore returned, a file tucked under one arm and concern etched deep in his face. "You look better," he said, pulling up a chair. "I don't feel it," Jack replied. Whitmore handed him the file. Inside was a rough map of the Bitter Creek Reserve. "This," he said, tapping the paper, "is where we found you. Sector 12. Jack scanned the area, then frowned. "There's no active trails out there." "Exactly," Whitmore said. "That sector hasn't been patrolled in 5 years. No campsites, no fire roads, nothing. Whoever dumped you there knew exactly where to hide a body." Jack's jaw tightened. So this wasn't random. Whitmore didn't flinch. No, it wasn't. Rachel walked in, coffee in one hand and a grim look in her eyes. We checked the scene again this morning, she said. Fresh tire tracks, chains recently cut. Someone came back last night. Jack's breath caught. They think I'm still out there. They were cleaning up loose ends, Rachel said, but Shadow's bark scared them off. Whitmore stood, pacing. This goes beyond poaching, he muttered. This is organized, coordinated. Someone forged patrol logs, deleted surveillance files, and sent false maintenance requests. This wasn't just an attack, it was a cover-up. Jack looked at both of them. I want to help. Rachel shook her head. You just got out of that tree. I'm not sitting behind a desk while they're still out there. Shadow, as if on cue, rose from the floor and sat beside Jack's bedtail still, eyes locked on the door. Later that evening, as the snow tapered into soft flurries, Rachel brought Shadow back into the room. She knelt beside Jack's bed, her voice lower now. I've been thinking. Jack raised an eyebrow. Shadow hasn't left your side. He obeys you, he protects you. That's not normal, not for him. I noticed, Jack said. Rachel hesitated. He's technically retired. Too much trauma, they said. But if he wanted, you could become a team. Jack blinked. You mean I could keep him? You'd have to go through training, certification, of course. But I've never seen him like this. Not since Monroe died. Jack turned to the shepherd. Shadow stared back, still and silent. No tail wagging. No tongue hanging, just waiting. Jack reached out again, placing his hand over Shadow's thick neck. If he's willing, he whispered, then I won't let him go. Shadow closed his eyes, and for a moment, the world felt still. Just before midnight, a deputy burst through the infirmary door, face pale, voice shaking. Sheriff, you need to see this. Everyone turned. We found fresh chains near Sector 12 again, the deputy said, and tracks leading back to the ranger station. Whitmore's face darkened. They came back? Rachel grabbed her jacket. We need to lock this place down. Jack sat up, pain flaring through his ribs. They're not finished. Shadow stood, ears pinned, tail stiff, nose twitching. Something was out there, watching, waiting. And this time, they weren't planning on leaving witnesses. The third morning after Jack Callahan was rescued, the storm finally eased. Outside the ranger station, the snow lay thick and still, too still. Ava Morgan zipped up her patrol jacket and stepped into the icy air. The landscape looked clean, untouched, but she'd been a canine handler long enough to know. Snow hides nothing. It only buries the truth for a while. And something about the way Shadow had been acting, ears perked, posture tense, growling low at night, told her one thing. Whoever tried to silence Jack wasn't done. Near the edge of Sector 12, Ava crouched next to a patch of broken brush. Shadow stood beside her, his breath slow, forming clouds in the cold air. She brushed away a layer of snow. Tire tracks. Faint, but there. Deep enough to suggest someone had returned during the night. More troubling than that, she found fresh boot prints, different sizes, different directions. Multiple people, she muttered. Shadow let out a quiet whine and moved ahead, nose low to the ground. A few yards farther, he stopped right in front of a shattered chain, its end freshly cut. Ava's stomach turned. They came back to erase evidence. But the dogs had gotten there first. Back at the station, Jack sat on a wooden bench by the window. He wasn't wearing his uniform, just a thermal blanket draped over his shoulders and bruises peeking from beneath his bandages. His body still ached, like someone had nailed each joint into place, but his mind was awake, alert. He watched Shadow pacing the hallway, ears forward, tail stiff. Ever since the rescue, the dog hadn't left the station walls. He rarely barked, never whined, but he watched. And Jack trusted that, more than anything else. Sheriff Charles Whitmore stood at the main map board, frowning. Sector 12 wasn't just abandoned, it was removed from the patrol roster 6 years ago. Why? Jack asked. Charles exhaled. Budget cuts. Or at least that's what they said. But now I'm starting to think someone wanted it that way. Rachel, still brushing snow off her sleeves, burst into the room. They were there last night. At least 2 sets of boots, they cut the chain clean. Jack's hands curled into fists. They're cleaning up, making sure nothing points back to them. Charles looked uneasy. They probably thought you died out there. Then now, Jack said. They know I didn't. Ava sat on the corner of the table, holding a steaming mug of coffee. There's more. Everyone looked up. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, a copy of a maintenance access form, dated 3 weeks ago. Someone requested access to wildlife cams in Sector 9, she said. Signed by Jack Callahan. Jack raised an eyebrow. I never signed that. Rachel stepped forward. We checked the log. That form was filed and approved under your name. Charles looked visibly shaken. So either someone forged your signature, Jack finished the thought, or someone inside has the power to fake authorization. The room went quiet. Shadow sat near the door, watching, waiting. Then Jack spoke, his voice calm, but full of weight. This wasn't just an attack, it was a hit. Silent, strategic. They wanted me erased. Rachel nodded. And someone in this station is helping them. That night, the wind returned. Not a storm, just the kind that whispered too loud through the trees. The kind that made you check over your shoulder twice before walking to your truck. Inside the ranger station, the lights flickered once, then again. Jack stood in the hallway, staring out the window. Snow danced past the glass in pale flurries. Somewhere in the darkness, a shape moved. A flash too fast to catch, but real. Shadow growled. Not loud, just enough. A sound like, we're not alone. Jack's thoughts spun. Who had access to the patrol rosters? Who could forge signatures? Who would benefit from silencing a ranger who cared too much? He thought of the illegal permits he'd flagged last year, the timber company that suddenly vanished after failing inspection. The poaching traps he found in an area that was never approved for wildlife removal. It was all coming together now. He wasn't just a threat. He was a liability. Later that evening, Jack sat with Ava in the command room. The lights were low, the monitors dimmed. Shadow lay at Jack's feet, body still, eyes alert. I know I wasn't supposed to dig that deep, Jack said quietly. Ava shook her head. You did your job. Jack looked at her. I think Shadow knew I was in danger before anyone else did. Ava didn't argue. Dogs feel things, they know when something's off. But what Shadow did, going rogue, leading a rescue, staying by your side, that's different. Jack sipped his coffee. You ever seen anything like it? Ava hesitated. Once, years ago. During a search and rescue in Montana, a dog refused to leave a collapsed cabin for 3 days. Turns out the missing hiker had been buried under the snow. That dog saved his life, refused to move, even when they tried to drag him away. She looked down at Shadow, but Shadow wasn't trained for search and rescue. Jack smiled faintly. Maybe he trained himself. Then came the knock. A deputy entered, holding a file. We reviewed patrol logs from the last 2 months. There's something wrong. He placed the folder in front of them. Jack flipped through the pages. Repeated gaps. Entries made under his name when he wasn't on shift, areas marked as checked that he never touched. One line caught his eye. Sector 9, camera reset completed by Officer L. Pierce. Jack's voice turned cold. Logan. Rachel appeared in the doorway, lips tight. That's impossible. Logan was assigned to Central Dispatch. Jack stood, a slow fire building in his chest. Then why was he out near the ridge the day before I was attacked? Ava met his gaze. You think he set you up? Jack didn't blink. I think he's not working alone. Suddenly, a bark shattered the air. Shadow. Low, urgent alert. He ran to the door, body stiff, nose high. Jack followed fast, heart racing. Outside on the snow-covered porch were footprints, fresh. No one had opened the door, and yet the prints were there, leading around the side of the station. Ava drew her weapon. Someone's here, Jack whispered. They're watching us. Shadow growled again, and this time it wasn't fear. It was a warning. The ranger station had gone silent. Not the kind of peaceful silence Jack Callahan was used to, the kind that came after a long day of patrols, with snow falling softly and the fire crackling in the hearth. This silence was heavier, tense, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Jack stood in the hallway, staring at the flickering light above the comms room. Shadow paced near the front door, his paws making no sound on the worn wooden floor. His ears were pinned back, his nose twitching in the air. Ava Morgan entered from the east corridor, flashlight in hand. Power just dipped again. Jack nodded. That's the third time tonight. Rachel stepped out of the office next door, a file in her hand. We need to back up all reports manually. If this keeps up, we'll lose the logs. Then it happened. The lights cut out, total blackness, followed by the mechanical hum dying into dead air. The generator hadn't kicked in. Shadow growled deep, low, primal, the kind of growl that said one thing. Something was here. Jack instinctively grabbed the old hatchet mounted on the hallway wall. Ava drew her sidearm, her voice low but firm. Everyone stay sharp. Then came the sound. Clink! Clink metal from the back of the building, near the garage. Rachel reached for her radio. South entrance, possible intruder, repeat. We may have a breach. Crash. Glass shattered. A door slammed. A gust of wind howled in, then silence again. Shadow bolted forward, body low, tail stiff, ears alert. Jack followed, pain flaring in his ribs but ignored under a rush of adrenaline. They moved through the mess hall, past the sleeping quarters, flashlight beams slicing through the dark. The air was cold. Too cold. Like something had opened the station to the elements. Then came another sound, footsteps, heavy, confident. No attempt to be quiet. Jack raised a hand and whispered, "Stop." They froze near the door to the generator room. From the other side, breathing. Not theirs. Someone was in there. Jack looked at Ava. She nodded once, weapon ready. He turned the handle and kicked the door open. Nothing. At least not at first. Just shelves, tools, and spilled oil. Then came the blur. A shadow lunged from behind the generator, swinging a metal pipe. Jack ducked. The pipe slammed into the doorframe with a brutal clang. Shadow didn't wait. He launched forward, jaws clamping onto the attacker's arm. The man screamed, dropping the weapon. "Stupid dog!" Jack tackled him from the side, slamming him against the wall. "You think you can walk in here like it's nothing?" The man struggled, eyes wide but not afraid, defiant. Rachel cuffed him in seconds, but the intruder just smiled. "You think I'm the only one?" Ava's radio crackled to life. "Pop, pop, pop, gunfire west side!" "They're breaching the garage!" Jack's heart dropped. "They're not here for me anymore," he said. Ava's voice was tight. "They're here to destroy everything." Outside the side window, Jack could see two masked figures breaking into the garage. One was already hot wiring a snowmobile. The engine coughed to life. "They're planning to escape through the ridge," Rachel said. "If they make it into the woods, we'll never find them." Jack turned to Shadow. "Can you stop them?" Shadow didn't hesitate. He was out the emergency exit in seconds, a black streak against the snow. Jack and Ava scrambled after him, boots crunching across ice. In the clearing behind the garage, headlights flashed. One figure mounted the snowmobile, revving it violently. Then impact. Shadow hit him mid-chest. The man flew off the vehicle, landing in a drift. The machine toppled to its side. The second intruder raised a pistol, but Jack was faster. He hurled the hatchet. The handle struck the attacker's wrist, sending the weapon flying. Ava tackled him before he could recover. Moments later, deputies flooded in, weapons raised. The fight was over. Jack stood there, breath heaving in the cold night air, his clothes soaked, his hands trembling. Then he saw Shadow, limping. Blood on the snow. Jack ran to him, dropped to his knees. A graze just above the leg, not deep, but enough. Shadow walked straight into him, resting his head against Jack's chest. "You saved us again," Jack whispered, voice cracking. "You saved everyone." Later, back inside the ranger station, the tension still hung in the air. The generator was restored, lights flickered back on. The prisoners were separated and under guard. Rachel sat with Jack in the infirmary as a vet examined Shadow's wound. "Clean graze," she said. "He'll be okay, stubborn dog." Jack chuckled softly. "You're damn right." Then he turned serious. "They weren't just attacking me." Rachel nodded. "They were after files, maps." "Permits." Jack looked at her. "They want everything buried." That night, as snow blanketed the forest once more, Jack couldn't sleep. He sat beside Shadow on the floor, gently stroking the dog's neck as he lay bandaged and still. "You knew," he whispered, "before any of us. You felt it." Shadow didn't move, but his eyes stayed fixed on the door, watching. Always watching, because out there just beyond the tree line someone was still waiting. And this was just the beginning. The snow had stopped falling, but inside the ranger station, the air was colder than ever. Jack Callahan stood at the end of the hallway, his hand resting on Shadow's head. The dog's breathing was steady, eyes sharp despite the fresh bandage on his leg. Nearby, deputies whispered behind closed doors. The radios crackled with static. No one was talking loudly, not anymore. Because now they all knew this wasn't just an attack, it was an inside job. Rachel entered the hallway carrying a stack of files, her expression grim. "They've refused to talk," she said. "All three of them. No names. No ID, no prints in any database." Jack raised an eyebrow. "So they're ghosts? Or professionals?" She handed him a slim folder. "This was buried in the logs. Thought you'd want to see it." Jack opened the folder slowly. It was a permit. 4 weeks ago, a civilian contractor had been granted temporary access to the north end of the Reserve Sector 9 for wildlife camera maintenance. Name, Jack Callahan. Except he never filed it. His signature at the bottom? A poor forgery? His jaw clenched. "Someone forged this, and someone in this station approved it." Rachel didn't answer. She didn't have to. Later that night, unable to sit still, Jack stepped outside into the snow-covered courtyard. The moon glowed faintly above the treetops, casting long shadows across the clearing. Shadow limped beside him, nose to the wind, tail low but alert. Then Jack saw him, Sheriff Charles Whitmore, standing alone by the north perimeter, staring into the trees. Something twisted in Jack's gut. Why was he out here? Why alone? Whitmore turned at the sound of approaching boots. His face lit up with a half-hearted smile. Couldn't sleep either. Not with everything going on. The sheriff chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. Funny, isn't it? All these years out here, and it turns out the forest wasn't the biggest threat. Jack stopped a few feet away. Shadow didn't move, just watched. Whitmore sighed and rubbed his hands together. "They were just trying to make a deal. I didn't know they'd take it that far, chaining you up like that. That wasn't part of the plan." Jack's heart dropped. "What did you just say?" Whitmore looked tired. "Not guilty, just tired. You were in the way. You kept flagging permits, digging into reports that were supposed to stay buried." Jack took a slow step forward. "It was you." Whitmore nodded slowly. "They offered money.
That's all it was supposed to be. Just look the other way. Jack's hands clenched into fists.
You left me to die. I didn't think you'd survive. Not in that storm. The sheriff glanced at Shadow, but I didn't count on him. The growl started low. Shadow moved forward, body tense, a sound like thunder building in his chest. Whitmore took a step back, one hand drifting toward his belt. Look, we can end this quietly. You walk away, take a commendation, a retirement check, maybe even a medal. You and that dog get your piece and no one ever finds out. Jack shook his head slowly. You think I'm going to stay quiet after everything? Whitmore's face darkened, his hand inched toward his weapon, tin. Too slow, Shadow lunged, a blur of fur and fury, knocking the sheriff onto the snow-packed ground. Whitmore hit hard, the breath knocked out of him. Jack stepped forward, his eyes locked on the man who once handed him his badge. You betrayed your oath. You betrayed me. By the time Rachel and the deputies arrived, the scene was still. Shadow sat calmly, ears high, as if he'd simply done his duty. Jack handed Rachel the forged documents.
Pull the patrol logs, compare signatures. He's been covering this for months. Rachel flipped through the papers, her face unreadable. Charles Whitmore didn't resist as they cuffed him.
Didn't speak as they led him away. Didn't even look back. Inside, the station felt different. Colder, emptier. The man who'd led them for over a decade was gone. And with him, a lifetime of trust. Jack slumped into the bench by the fire, his hands buried in his face. Rachel sat across from him, the documents in her lap. Everything he touched is compromised, Jack said. Permits, reports, patrol logs. Rachel nodded slowly. Then we start over. Jack looked down at Shadow, curled at his feet, eyes open. Not without him. But something in Shadow had changed too. That night he didn't rest. He paced the station walls, alert to every creak, every shift of wind. Jack stayed beside him, whispering soft words into the dark. You knew before any of us. You felt it. You always do. Shadow didn't answer. But he didn't blink either, just kept watching the trees. Because deep down, Jack knew this wasn't over. The fire in the main lodge crackled softly, casting long shadows on the log walls. Jack Callahan sat in silence, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the flickering flame, but his mind wasn't in the room. It was in the trees. In the dark, in every corner of the forest where lies had taken root. Rachel dropped a thick folder on the table in front of him. 15 years of patrol logs. I've already found 6 forged signatures yours. Mine, even a few from rangers who transferred out long ago. Jack looked up. All tied to Sector 9 and 12? Rachel nodded. And a few in Sector 3, the ones marked unsafe for winter patrol. Turns out those were fake too. Just enough red tape to keep good people away. Jack exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about poaching. No, Rachel said, pulling up a chair. It was bigger. In the days following Sheriff Whitmore's arrest, state investigators began digging through everything: permits, land access records, equipment logs. And what they uncovered was more than corruption. It was a network. A long-standing chain of silent approvals and buried documents that allowed companies to quietly exploit protected land, cutting timber, burying waste, even building illegal roads through untouched terrain. All under the radar. All under official signatures. Dalton may have taken the money, Rachel said, but someone higher up gave the green light. Jack leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed. So who? Rachel slid another paper across the table. That's the part that doesn't make sense. It was a transfer record, a name Jack didn't recognize. Mark Howie. Transferred in 8 months ago from a non-existent department. No background, no prior ranger work. Jack scanned the document. And he was on duty the night before I was taken. Rachel looked grim. And we haven't seen him since.
Shadow stirred under the table, letting out a soft growlo, uncertain.
Jack glanced down. Even he doesn't like that name.
Rachel stood, pacing slowly. We've been looking for corruption in the office, but I think it goes deeper. I think there's someone still inside, still pulling strings. Jack nodded slowly. Someone who knows the system from the inside out. And someone who just lost Whitmore as a shield. That night, Jack found himself back outside. The cold air hit his lungs like ice.
Shadow walked beside him, silent, steady. Even with a healing wound, the dog moved with purpose. Every noise, every flicker in the tree line drew his attention. As they reached the perimeter fence, Jack stopped. Beyond the ridge, the forest stretched out in silence. But something felt wrong, too still, too quiet. He turned to Shadow. You feel it too, don't you? The dog didn't move. Didn't blink, but his tail stiffened. Back inside, Ava was reviewing radio logs when Jack entered. We have a problem, he said simply. She raised an eyebrow. I think they're still watching us. Ava leaned forward. Who's they? Jack handed her the file on Mark Howie. Whoever sent him, whoever forged that maintenance request, whoever made sure I was sent into the woods alone. Ava flipped through the file, her expression darkening. We need to go back, she said. To where? Jack didn't hesitate. The abandoned patrol cabin in Sector 9. The cabin had been listed as unsafe for winter access for years. Dalton himself had signed off on the restriction. But when they arrived the next morning, snow crunching beneath the tires of their patrol truck, the first thing they noticed was fresh footprints. Not deep, but recent. The lock on the front door, broken and reattached. Jack stepped inside first, Shadow at his side. The cabin was cold, too clean. A thin layer of dust covered the stove, but the table showed signs of recent use. A coffee cup, half empty. Someone had been here. Recently. Rachel entered last, her hand hovering near her sidearm. Then a sound. A click from the back room. Jack turned toward the noise just as the first gunshot shattered the silence. The gunshot tore through the silence. Jack ducked, pulling Shadow down with him as a second shot splintered the wooden doorframe behind them. Rachel dropped to one knee, weapon drawn, scanning the shadows. Back room, she shouted. Jack kicked open the side door, empty. But the attacker was already gone, slipping into the trees like a ghost. They swept the cabin. No more gunfire. No more footsteps. Just the sharp scent of gunpowder hanging in the air. Outside, fresh tracks led north, then vanished into wind-swept snow. They had come close. Too close. Back at the ranger station, a medic cleaned the scrape on Jack's arm. It wasn't serious, but the sting wasn't physical. It was the weight of something else. Someone had tried to kill them. Again. And they were running out of time. That afternoon, Jack sat in the office, staring at a plain white envelope on the desk. It had been hand-delivered by a state official. No fanfare, just a quiet knock and a few clipped words. You're being offered reassignment. Desk job, full benefits, safer life. Inside the envelope was a transfer order. Back to Helena, regional headquarters, no more field work. No more risk, no more Shadow. Ava walked in a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. She placed one beside him and nodded at the envelope. You thinking about it? Jack didn't answer right away. He looked down at the bandaged dog lying at his feet. Shadow's tail thumped once, softly, as if he understood the question. Jack sighed. I've been chasing peace for 20 years. Ava sat. You've earned it. He nodded. But I didn't survive all this just to sit behind a desk and file reports. She smiled faintly. Didn't think you would. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a second folder. This came from the State K9 Division, she said. Valor sorry, Shadow has been cleared for reactivation. Jack looked up sharply. He's yours. If you want him, but you'll need to go through K9 retraining together. New unit, new rules. She placed the file in front of him. It read, Echo Tactical K9 Unit, Lead J. Callahan Jack stared at it, then down at Shadow. The dog met his gaze. Still, loyal, unblinking, waiting.
You really think I'm qualified to lead a task force? Jack asked. Ava shrugged. You already did. You kept this place standing when everything else was falling apart.
Jack looked back at the transfer form, then at the new unit file. 2 futures. One safe, quiet, disconnected. The other, filled with risk, unknowns, but purpose. That evening, he took Shadow outside. The air was crisp. The stars above glittered through a break in the clouds. Jack knelt beside the dog, his hand brushing over the thick fur along Shadow's neck. They want us to start over, he said softly. New team, new name. New mission. Shadow didn't move, but Jack felt it, the slow shift of the dog's weight, pressing against him like a silent yes. You're with me, aren't you? Jack whispered. Shadow licked his hand once. It was the only answer he needed. Later that night, the decision was made. Jack signed the Echo unit file, turned in the Helena transfer unsigned, and when Rachel found him, packing gear into a new patrol bag, she smiled. Told you weren't the desk job type. Jack grinned. Yeah, I've got better company anyway. Shadow barked once low and confident. And in that moment, the station's guard, tired, weathered by betrayal, felt alive again. Because now, they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to take everything back. Together. The air inside the old cabin was thick with dust and danger. Jack Callahan's breath hitched as he pressed against the wall, just feet away from the back room where a gunman had just opened fire. Rachel flanked the other side, her sidearm drawn. Shadow crouched low beside Jack, eyes locked on the door, his body tense like a coiled spring. Jack gave a small hand signal. Wait. Listen. Move. A creak. A shift of weight. And then the attacker stepped into view. It was Mark Howie, a deputy Jack had seen at morning briefings, quiet, polite. One of Sheriff Whitmore's hand-picked men. Except now, his badge was gone and his pistol was up. You should have stayed dead, Ranger, he spat. Jack's voice was calm. And you should have stayed out of my forest. Before another word passed, Mark fired. A single shot. A scream tore through the air, but it wasn't Jack's. It was Shadow. The dog yelped and dropped to the floor, a streak of blood painting the wooden boards. Jack's heart stopped. Shadow! He lunged toward the dog, but Mark stepped forward, gun raised again. I built this, Mark hissed. Dalton was just a face. I kept the files clean. I forged the permits. You think locking him up stopped anything? You're just scratching the surface. Jack's hands balled into fists. You shot my dog. Mark didn't blink. That dog cost us everything. Rachel moved fast, circling around the side of the room. While Jack kept Mark talking, her boots silent against the floorboards, she raised her weapon from behind. Drop it, she commanded. Mark barely turned before Rachel struck him hard, knocking him to the ground. The gun skittered away. In seconds, she had him cuffed. Jack didn't wait. He rushed to Shadow. Blood soaked the floor beneath the dog's leg. The bullet had torn through muscle, dangerously close to an artery. Shadow whimpered, but stayed conscious, his eyes still locked on Jack. Stay with me, boy, Jack whispered, wrapping his jacket tight around the wound. Stay with me. Rachel was already calling in the evac team. We've got a K9 down. We need transport now. They didn't wait. Jack carried Shadow out himself, arms trembling under the dog's weight. The snow was falling again as they reached the truck, and Jack didn't care about anything except the steady rise and fall of Shadow's chest. You're gonna be okay, he whispered over and over. You have to be. At the K9 Veterinary Center 3 hours later, the surgeon gave the update. The bullet missed the artery by inches.
He's lucky he'll need surgery, but he's a fighter. Jack didn't leave Shadow's side. Not during prep. Not during surgery. Not during the long, quiet hours afterward. By the time Shadow finally opened his eyes again, groggy but alert, Jack had tears in his own. "Hey, partner," he said softly. "You scared the hell out of me." Shadow's tail thumped once, slow, but certain. The story of what happened spread fast. Local news picked it up first, then regional. Soon, headlines read, K9, dog shot saving ranger in corruption scandal. Wounded hero, Shadow's sacrifice exposes deeper rot. People wrote letters, kids sent drawings, veterans donated to the new Echo K9 fund. But Jack didn't care about cameras or headlines. He only cared that Shadow was alive. Back at the station, Rachel updated him. "Mark's already lawyered up, refuses to name anyone else but the files we pulled from the cabin." She placed a USB drive in Jack's hand. "They tell a different story. Permits shell companies, names." Jack stared at it, jaw tight. "How deep does this go?" Rachel met his eyes. "Deeper than we thought, but now we've got proof." Jack looked down at the bandaged Shadow, resting quietly. "They shot my dog," he said. "They tried to bury the truth." His voice hardened. "Now we dig it all up." Spring came late to Bitter Creek. But when it arrived, it melted more than just snow. It thawed silence. It unearthed truth, and in the center of it all stood a ranger and a wounded K9, two survivors of a war no one knew was being fought. Shadow had survived surgery. His leg was bandaged, his stride was slower, but his eyes, still sharp. Still watching. The station called it a miracle. Jack Callahan called it something else, a promise kept. "He wouldn't fall," Jack told the local paper when they asked how Shadow had survived. "Because he knew I hadn't." News crews came and went. The story traveled faster than wildfire. A retired K9 who disobeyed orders to save a man. A ranger who survived a political hit job. A network of corruption crumbling under the weight of loyalty. They called it the redemption of Bitter Creek. But Jack didn't care for titles. He cared about finishing the job. In the weeks following the shooting, a full task force was deployed. Federal agents, state auditors, land surveyors, they swept through Bitter Creek like wind through the trees. And what they found? Buried permits. Fake inspection reports, evidence of illegal land deals going back over a decade, dozens of names. Only a few familiar, but one thing was clear. Dalton and Mark weren't working alone. Jack spent long hours giving statements, going over maps, identifying locations of fraudulent activity. Rachel became interim station chief. Ava helped organize a new K9 rotation. And Shadow? Shadow never left Jack's side. Not for a minute. He walked slowly at first, then with more confidence. By the third week, he was back to patrolling, limping, but proud. Deputies saluted him like a fellow officer. Kids sent care packages with bones and hand-drawn badges. Veterans called him a soldier among soldiers, but Shadow didn't need medals. He had Jack. One afternoon, just before sunset, Jack took Shadow out to the old overlook. It was where he used to come when patrols ended. Before the betrayal, before the chains, before the shot. They stood in silence. The valley below greened up again, the trees alive, the snow finally gone. "You kept me alive," Jack whispered. "Now I'm gonna keep you moving." Shadow sat beside him, his body worn, but his spirit unbreakable. Later that week, Rachel returned from a briefing in the capital. She handed Jack a sealed envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a formal declaration. Jack Callahan, officially named lead, Echo Tactical K9 Unit K9 Shadow, reactivated under permanent command. Jack read the words twice. then looked down at Shadow. "Well," he murmured, "looks like we've got work to do." Shadow barked, once quiet, but full of purpose. That night they gathered in the station lounge, not for strategy, not for defense, but for something they hadn't had in a long time: hope. Ava raised a toast, to Echo Unit, to truth and to the dog who brought it home. Jack lifted his glass but didn't speak. He simply looked at Shadow and nodded, because sometimes the greatest warriors don't speak at all. They just keep standing no matter how many times they're knocked down. The snow was gone. In its place, wildflowers bloomed along the edges of the trails, and the trees whispered again, not with fear, but with peace. But inside the ranger station at Bitter Creek, Jack Callahan knew peace didn't mean the fight was over. It just meant they were ready this time. He stood at the perimeter fence that morning, boots muddy, echo patch fresh on his shoulder. Shadow sat at his heels, scarred, healed, proud. Behind them, the new recruits of Echo Tactical K9 Unit ran drills with their handlers. Clean dogs, clean records. Real training, no more ghosts in the system, no more forged permits. Everything that came next would be built on truth and trust. Rachel walked up beside him, handing over a fresh set of maps. Latest perimeter expansions. They finally approved the West Ridge for restoration. Jack smiled, tracing the lines with his finger. That was a battlefield once. Now it's sanctuary, she said. He looked out toward the tree line, and it stays that way. For good. Later that day, Ava joined them in the comms cabin, dropping a short file onto the table. Final federal report came in. Jack flipped it open. Dozens of names, convictions, fines, terminations. A few got away for now, but the core had been cracked. Dalton, Howie, the shell corporations, the land deals, all exposed. This place almost broke, Ava said quietly. Jack looked at Shadow, but it didn't. That evening, as the sun dipped below the pines, they held a small ceremony on the overlook. No press. No speeches. Just them. The team. Rachel handed Jack a worn silver tag, engraved with one word. Shadow. He clipped it to the dog's collar himself. Not just a partner, he said. A guardian. Shadow wagged his tail just once. But it said everything. A young cadet stepped forward, barely 20, carrying a folded flag. She looked at Jack with reverence. They wanted to send this for Valor thought he'd been retired. Jack took the flag and shook his head. He never retired. He looked around the circle of face-sold rangers, new recruits, handlers, friends. He just changed uniforms. That night, Jack walked the perimeter one last time before turning in. Shadow was with him, of course nose low, ears twitching with every movement, but there was no fear now, no threat lurking. Just a readiness that never left. As they reached the far fence line, Jack looked out over the forest, still, quiet, alive. He knelt down beside his companion. "You know," he said, rubbing behind Shadow's ears, "they say the forest always knows its protectors." Shadow leaned in, warm and steady. "You came back for me," Jack whispered. "So now I stay for you, for them, for this land." A breeze stirred the grass, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Jack stood. Shadow rose beside him, two silhouettes against the twilight. One man, one dog, and the unbreakable promise they carried between them. Because in the end, this story wasn't about a rescue. It was about redemption, and how sometimes the loudest vow is made in silence. Life lesson from Shadow, the soldier who wouldn't fall. In a world where loyalty often feels like a forgotten word, the story of Ranger Jack Callahan and his canine partner Shadow reminds us of something timeless. Integrity, courage, and silent devotion still matter. Jack was left to die betrayed by the very people he trusted most, but he didn't give up. And Shadow,
A retired war dog, once broken by loss, found the strength to trust again, choosing to save a man he had never met. Together, they uncovered corruption, protected the innocent, and proved that sometimes the strongest vows are made without words at all. For those of us who have lived long enough to know loss, disappointment, and quiet resilience. This story resonates deeply, because in life, the greatest companions aren't always loud. They're the ones who stand beside us in the dark, asking for nothing in return. When the world turns cold, be like Jack, stand firm. And when someone needs you, be like Shadow, loyal, fearless, and never backing down.